Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Super Dandori Bros Podcast, Episode 8. We are your hosts. I am Leighton, and with me I have the Pikmin Master, Ryan.
I don't know about that.
Well, in my world, you are. And today is going to be a very Pikmin-filled day. We're going to be talking all about Pikmin. As for those who've played Pikmin, you would know just by the name of our channel and our podcast, Super Dandori Bros. We're very much Pikmin lovers. We'll get into a little bit about Dandori, but it's a Japanese term for efficiency, and it's very prevalent in the Pikmin games. So we find it's something we love, and we're going to get into all the games. I was going to say all 4 games, but technically there's 5, and we will go into even Hey Pikmin. But yes, the reason why we love it and why it's such a great franchise. And I'm going to let Ryan talk a little bit just because I know he's actually the one who got me into Pikmin. So I feel like let's start. Like you started playing Pikmin way before I got into it. I mean, you played the first Pikmin when it came out, right?
More or less, yeah. So my first experience with Pikmin was I went over to like a friend's house. I was in elementary school at the time, and Pikmin had released, and I had no idea what it was. Obviously, it was a new IP. I actually didn't own a Nintendo console up until that point, unless you count the Game Boy Color. But he showed me Pikmin, and I'm like, oh, hey, like this looks like really cool. Like, you get to collect ship parts, and you got all these little guys, and you defeat enemies. And wow, I've never played anything like this before. It looks really neat. And so I remember going home to my mom and saying, hey, Mom, there's this game called Pikmin that I want, but it's for a console I don't have. And she's like, oh, okay, well, what, tell me about the game. I'm like, you control little men of different colors, and they whack their heads on things to kill them. That was my description of the game to my mom. But like in essence, it sort of like, is the basic premise of the game. But the way that obviously it's presented in game is very different. And, I sort of, fell in love with it. Eventually she did let me get it. And then when the sequel came out, I, obviously got that too. And so I've been around for the 2 long Pikmin hiatuses, the 2 Pikmin depressions, if you will. I've technically played, it's funny you said 5. It's true. There are more or less 5. I would actually argue in some ways there are 7 Pikmin games, where you got Pikmin Bloom. It's not really a Pikmin game, but it is, a Pikmin game, technically, in name. But then also, I think Pikmin Adventure on Nintendo Land. The
I forgot
it's like
about
in some
that.
ways, like it's close enough to a Pikmin game that I would say like it, sort of like the rest of Nintendo Land. It sort of captures like some of the essence of it, while it's still like giving you something new. And so like I count it. It is Pikmin as an IP, even if it isn't actual Pikmin. But when I'm counting like all the games that I played, like I would count that in there. So I guess my definition of a Pikmin game is actually quite liberal. But going back to Pikmin 1, I fell in love with it, and I played it first, I don't know, maybe like 2002 or so. So like about a year after it came out, I think. I'm not exactly sure when it came out now that I think about it. But just like everyone else, I popped the disc in and played it, and I was terrible at the game. Like absolutely terrible at it. And I think, I ended up using like one of those Prima strategy guides, which I think you actually have my copy of.
I do.
Yeah. And that's like the only way that like I like knew how to beat the game, and I was like happy when I was able to clear like the like bad, like the not the bad ending, but the like mediocre ending. I felt so proud. I'm like, oh yeah, in 30 days, like I got the necessary ship parts. I was so stoked. And obviously, as I played it, I got better. But then Pikmin 2 came out, and Pikmin 2 was my jam. I loved Pikmin 2. And to this day, it's still one of my favorites. Though I'd say now that Pikmin 4's come out, it's sort of superseded that. But Pikmin 2 was much more my jam as a kid. Like, I didn't like the time limit as much. I just sort of wanted to run around and kill things with Pikmin, and just like grow the Pikmin population. So that those were like the early years for me. You, however, played those two in some ways last, right?
Yeah.
And so you have a different perspective. You sort of like gone through this weird order of the newer ones, then the older ones. So what about you? What was it like encountering them as an adult for the first time?
It's so interesting. Yeah, I think, and I'm sure that my experience is probably actually very common because the GameCube wasn't a top selling system. In fact, it's funny, you look at other than Pikmin 4, almost every Pikmin game has come out on a very not one of Nintendo's worst systems. The Pikmin 1 and 2 came on the GameCube, which only sold like 21 million units, and then the Wii U for Pikmin 3. Now, granted, all the games are on Switch now, but Pikmin 4 is the first game to launch on a successful Nintendo system, which is why I think it's one of the most successful versions of it. But yeah, my first it was Pikmin 3, actually, not Pikmin 4. So I did play Pikmin 3 on the Wii U because it was on sale, and I was like, oh, I'll get it. And I didn't actually get too far into it because, again, my experience with Pikmin 1, because I remember when Pikmin 1 came out, and I remember it being very interesting. I mean, Nintendo game, right? It was super cool and it was super hyped up. But I remember seeing that time limit, and I was like, no, I'm out. Time limits in games really scared me for some reason because I just didn't like the stress of like feeling like I wasn't doing things on time or well enough. Now as an adult, I mean, it's funny because I love Pikmin games now, and I love Majora's Mask as one of my favorite Zelda games, which is incredibly time limiting. So it's just about maturity, I guess, which might show why the first Pikmin and even the Majora's Mask games struggled with audiences, because it is a lot more, it's a little bit more intense, a little more stressful, especially as a kids game, asking kids to be time managers. So, but yeah, you were asking about, going from new to old. It was very jarring because you're so used to so many of the quality of life improvements, especially in Pikmin 4, which is just, some people fight this. Some people say, oh, it's too easy. They don't like the auto lock. And there's problems with that, but I kind of have grown to like the auto lock. And so going back and having to aim and I played the HD games that you let me borrow for the Switch, which were basically playing like the original game, it's just dual analog, I guess. Well, the first GameCube wasn't dual analog, though, was it? It was like you just kind of moved the single analog stick, and yeah. So it was a little bit better, but still hard to aim and super hard to control your Pikmin, So, but I think I really liked Pikmin 1 because it was a very tight-knit, very, what's the way for it? Just every minute of it was jam-packed full of something to do. Like, it was short, but it was just a really tasty morsel. I don't know how else to put it. Like, it's the same reason I like Portal 2. It's not a long game, but every minute of that game is so jam-packed full of good content and fun. And I'm actually a little bit more, like, I love a good open world game, but Pikmin is very much like, I really enjoy the just condensed fun. So, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out a way to put my thoughts into, the differences. I do appreciate Pikmin 1 and Pikmin 2, but yeah, it is jarring. It is jarring as someone who's been playing the new ones more. So, I don't know if that answers anything.
No, absolutely. I mean, I feel like, fundamentally there have been changes to the Pikmin formula. I think most notably I'm trying to decide whether or not the leap was, I think the leap was biggest from 3 to 4 in some ways, but then also from 2 to 3 was quite significant. I think 2 to 3 in terms of like Pikmin AI and pathing and the difficulty of combat and sort of in some ways quality of life, whereas Pikmin 4 was more of like not necessarily gameplay style or difficulty, but I guess like the way that you as the player navigate the environment fundamentally changed. Like there were fewer platforming puzzles. Obviously in the caves you had some, but like Pikmin 3 had the the cans on the scales and like different you had to like throw the captains and stuff like that, which was missing from 4. And so I think like the environment as an obstacle was not quite as prevalent in 4. So I feel like, in that way, it was very different. But I think, even from 1 to 2, there was sort of a large gameplay gap, not just in terms of like just the time limit, which is, you know, what everyone focuses on, but even like the idea of having the Pikmin differentiated by like combat ability as starkly as the purple Pikmin were from everything else. Like, yeah, reds did more damage in one, and that made them quite valuable, but in some ways it was more like the Pikmin you used were more often like decided by the environment you were in, and it is still the case in 2 to some extent, but you know, most of those hazards can be collapsed, right, in 2, except with the exception of water, and even in some cases you can get rid of the water, but and the hazards are more forgiving in 2, but except for electricity. But I feel like 2 did a really good job of differentiating a lot of the elemental like aspects of Pikmin, and also giving Pikmin like better identity. So I think each game has like fundamentally shifted the Pikmin formula in a way that one obviously was manageable by the hardware, but 2 sort of in some ways like probably reflected their priorities at the time. And so I think, you know, developing the Pikmin and adding new Pikmin, like it made sense, especially because Pikmin 2 focuses much more on like type management, and especially like down in caves where like types can be like extremely important. And you can't like replenish your Pikmin. You would want, you know, like to make it engaging gameplay and to make it strategic. If you're not going to have time, then you want to have limited resources. And so that's why caves make a lot of sense in that context. But certainly going back and losing the differentiation that each game brings, whether or not it was preserved, you know, entirely from one game to the next, but losing that differentiation, I think, you know, definitely makes the formula, I don't know, seem in some ways less enjoyable, because I think that for the most part, each game is an improvement on the last game for the most part. Yeah, I don't know. Does that sort of, you know,
absolutely
communicate?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's interesting going, for me, starting with the new ones and going back, I realized how much was taken and either inspired by or literally just generally taken from the original games. Because there's certain elements, like if you play Pikmin 1, you go to Pikmin 2, and then Pikmin 3. Like there's certain things that are brought over, some things that are left behind. Like in Pikmin 3, there are no purple Pikmin. There are no white Pikmin. They're gone. And but then they bring it back. And so it's like, you know, for me, it was kind of fun to get to go back and see like where the origins were, like, you know, how they began, like, and try to imagine what it was like playing those games for the first time, you know. But I did go back. So I did 3, 4, then 2, 1, 2. So 2 is technically the most recent. I mean, I've replayed some of them, but like as far as like the last game I played on all of them, in a way I did it like Star Wars style, where like 3 and 4 somehow were like the original trilogy, and then like 1 and 2 are like the prequels. But and obviously there's no story really where you have to play them in any order. You can play any game in any order and still... Well, that's not true. I think 2 is weird because it does kind of follow the events of 1, whereas 3 and 4... I mean, 3 barely. It does. It's clearly a sequel, but you don't really need to know a whole lot.
Yeah.
Whereas 4 is just like a complete reset on the story, which has a lot of people wondering what's going on there, which I mean, it's a little sad, but also I don't mind. They made a phenomenal game. I do think it's so interesting though, seeing how, like, I'm trying, because so Pikmin 1 came out in 2001, Pikmin 2 came out in 2004, so there's only a 3-year gap. And to see like for the first game, right, which is very simple, 30 days. I wanted to say 15, but that's the Pikmin 4 version. It's like only 30 days, and I mean, you can easily beat the game. I don't know what the record is. I mean, I think I did it in like 20.
It's something like 6 days. Like, it's something crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not that good. I think I did it in like 22, which is, you know, my first playthrough, right? I was pretty proud of that. But then you play that game and you're like, oh, it's over. And then you play Pikmin 2, which is just like so insanely different. Like the production value at the beginning with all the cutscenes, and then you've got like you could start in an ice world, and then you have 2 characters to control, which is so crazy. And then you get the new Pikmin, and there's no time limit. You're like, what is going on? And it's like, it's amazing. I'm kind of thinking like Nintendo was like, okay, people didn't like the time limit, so we're going to take that away. But we want to also make more content because people thought the first game was too short. And so like you can see them almost like trying to change things to kind of like fix the things people might have had problems with in the first one. So that's why it kind of pivoted so differently. And then it took me a while to realize this because in I think it's the only Pikmin game I think that does this, but the Underground is procedurally generated, which I didn't catch until I died a few times and kept going back and realizing, wait, the level layout's different. And so
it's limited, but it is, yeah.
It's interesting how they did that so early on. In 2004, they were putting in this procedural generated like dungeon crawling stuff, which I'm curious if they'll ever bring that back. But yeah, it was,
I'd love a Pikmin roguelike.
I think that'd be amazing, and I think it's possible. But you know, and we've always been questioning like, what's the next Pikmin? Is Pikmin 5 just a continuation, or do we think we'll see more spin-off Pikmin games? I would love to see more spin-off Pikmin games personally, just because I think there's so much they could do with it that's not just traditional Pikmin. As much as I love traditional Pikmin, but I think Nintendo, sometimes they have winners, sometimes they don't, but when they do have some weird offshoot, they sometimes knock it out of the park, and it's just fun to have some variety, you know, instead of eating bread all the time.
And I think Dandori games like don't appeal to everyone, and so I think just giving the like intellectual property awareness outside of that particular genre would actually be quite useful.
100%
for Nintendo. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, so it'd be interesting. So speaking of Dandori, like we should probably go a little bit more into that since it's part of our name and it's a big part of Pikmin. So correct me if I'm doing this wrong, but my understanding at a very basic level is Dandori is essentially being as efficient you can with the time you're given.
I think that's a pretty good representation of it, yeah.
Yeah, I should look up the exact definition, but that is essentially the way it's presented and why it's such a critical thing. And now, you also correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I'm aware, Pikmin 4 is the first time they really used the term Dandori.
Yes. Yeah, to my knowledge, yes.
Despite it being essentially like a core aspect of every Pikmin game, it's the first time that they actually felt comfortable using it as a general term. I mean, there's Dandori battles. They call it that. And I love that personally. I think it's great that Nintendo's embracing more of their Japanese side and not being... I think that's just the culture changing. Back when the GameCube and all that was so coming out, Japan was still... The Japanese culture was still trying to enter the U.S. market, and people still didn't know what it was, where I think a generation or two have gone by now that grew up with it, and now Japanese culture is just so welcomed here. So they can... Nintendo feels more comfortable being more open with their... you know, their terminology and their mindset and their philosophies. So, so we made Super Dandori Bros because we want to be kind of Dandori and everything. So we're very efficient. I mean, every game I play, I'm just hyper optimizing everything, probably to a fault, but
to the point where it takes all the creativity out of the game. You're like, this is the best way to do it, and there's no other way to play.
I hoard so many items in games, and I'm like super efficient about spending, and like I don't want to waste anything. So like by the end of a game, I have more than I need. I could just literally just walk all over the boss and just end it. Pikmin, though, is not quite like that. I mean, you can definitely, especially Pikmin 4 is the first game where you could potentially go a little bit more like you can buy more items and prepare yourself. But most Pikmin games are pretty much like the only building up you can do is making more Pikmin. But at the end of the day, you have to go in with only a set number of Pikmin. You can't. Doesn't matter if you have 250 red Pikmin in your onion. You have to go in with 100 Pikmin. And so
the only exception being the super spicy sprays in 2 and 3, and then also the ultra bitter spray in 2.
True. Yeah, that's true. I forgot about those. So, but yeah, I mean, overall though, like it's very much like everyone kind of goes in with a very similar loadout, and you have to be very strategic about which Pikmin. Even like you look at I gotta say the final boss. I'm gonna confess something here. I haven't actually beat Pikmin 2. I've only beat the first part of Pikmin 2, like the part that starts the credits. But I never completely finished the part with after, like when you have the president and everything. And that's to my shame, but it's so hard. Holy cow!
It's ridiculously hard. It's so hard.
It's Halo 2 Legendary type hard.
Oh gosh, yeah, pretty much.
Which is funny because they both came out the same year.
Yeah, hot take. I think that Pikmin 2 is the better game.
Yeah, but, no, that's what we're here to say. We're here to discuss why Pikmin is the best franchise ever. Eat your heart out, Halo. Obviously, they're two very, very different franchises.
Oh yeah, they're totally different. Like it's comparing apples and oranges. Like, but, truly, yeah, it's a ridiculous comparison, but it's a comparison for entertainment purposes. You know what I mean?
But the good thing is Pikmin's still making good games. So
yeah. Ooh, shots fired.
So, but yeah, it's
Pikmin 4 did have a worse tutorial though.
It did. That's one criticism I would have of Pikmin 4 is just a way to skip the tutorial, like just bypass everything, go straight into the game. Thankfully, at least on your second playthrough, you can skip most of the dialogue. That part is nice, but yeah, I wish you could just bypass the tutorial altogether. Just get straight to having a base and then just starting to play. And that all tutorial things just get turned off. They don't explain anything to you. That'd be just a nice quality of life thing for pretty much any game, is that if you play a second playthrough and the game knows you're doing a second playthrough. Nintendo's games in general, other than a few, kind of most of the time don't do that. It's like even like with the Zelda games, like you go back to play, you beat the boss at like the newest games, Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild. You can't just beat the boss and go see the world after you've won. It's just, you have to always play the game as if with this looming dread over you. Anyway, going back to Pikmin, we were talking about difficulty. We're talking about Pikmin 2, because the switch from Pikmin 1 to 2. So Pikmin 2 gave you more content and gave you more variety, but it was so much harder than Pikmin 1 overall. And so I think that unfortunately it was at a time when the GameCube wasn't doing well, so it didn't sell very well, even though it's a phenomenal game. And then that kind of led to this great drought. This Pikmin, like people thought it was just over. Now they did release Pikmin 1 and 2 on the Wii with the updated controls, so at least they did that. And some people would argue those were the best controls. I don't know. I never actually played the Wii versions. Have you played the Wii versions?
I have not. I've heard that they're good, but I've never had the pleasure of ever playing them.
Yeah, I heard, it's just because, I mean, the pointer controls have their pros and cons. Some people love it, some people hate it. It can be a little funky sometimes if you have this sensor bar set up wrong. But the idea of being able to, and essentially that's what the pointer was like a mouse and keyboard type setup where you could actually just point to where you wanted to throw Pikmin. I get the appeal of that in a way. So I'm the weird one in Pikmin 3 where I probably didn't learn the controls properly, so I would use the touchscreen to aim and throw my Pikmin. So I would aim, use the touchscreen, kind of move the cursor around, and then just tap rapidly to throw Pikmin. I didn't even know there was any form of lock-on in Pikmin 3.
That's wild.
So, yeah, you told me that later. I was like, the what now? It's like,
there's lock-on?
There's lock-on? I just fully committed to... I played it the same way I used to play Metroid Prime Hunters. Like, I was one of those people, I love the touchscreen pointer controls, and so I just kind of played like that. And I think in that game, though, you tap to jump and then use but still, it was like, my hand muscle memory just came back to me. That's how I played Pikmin 3.
That's how I played it too. So I remember I played it like basically in one day when it came out.
It's a very short game. I still remember
like it is quite short, and I was very disappointed with how short it was. I remember like when it came out, I'm like, wow, like it's been so long since I've gotten to play this, and just based on where I was in my life, I'm like, I definitely like want to play this and be able to sort of reminisce about this a little bit. And so I got it, brought it home, beat it very quickly, loved it obviously because it's a great game. And so like some people could argue, and I think in some ways they could be right depending on what they value, that it's the best game in the franchise. I personally disagree, but I can understand why someone would feel that way depending on what it is that they like about Pikmin. You know what I mean? Because I feel like the level design in 3 is impeccable in terms of like a platforming and puzzle standpoint. And I feel like some of that design philosophy got incorporated into the caves of 4 specifically. But 3 I felt was a phenomenal game. I remember playing it. It looked beautiful. It was like one of the only games I had for the Wii U. And and I was the same way. I used the I think it was the touch controls or something. I used one control method. I don't remember what it was. And then I remember it got an update later on, and I went back and played it after I had met my wife, which was, like a couple years later or so. And I used like the other control method. I'm like, nah, it's not as good. And I went back to, I'm pretty sure it was the touch controls. I may be wrong and get roasted in the comments or something. But no, I really, I also was one of those psychopaths that like using the touchscreen controls. Though I don't know if I could go back to it now.
Apparently, like the way a lot of people said you're supposed to play it, I don't know if this is, and I don't know because I didn't play it this way, but it was to have the gamepad on your lap for like, using a map and inventory and stuff like that, and then use the Wii remote and nunchuck to control. Like, that's what I heard some people talk about, and I thought, that's crazy. Like, I get the reasoning as far as, like, the pointer controls could be argued to be more efficient, like, as far as aiming and stuff goes, but, like...
Yeah.
To me, it's just, I don't want to hold that many controllers in my lap. I just used the touchscreen, and I was totally fine. Yeah, and I just love the how it all worked. I've played the Wii U version, and you and I beat the co-op Switch version. And Switch version was
in
fine.
One day.
In one day. Well, it's so short, it's not hard to do, especially co-op. You steamroll that game. But
absolutely.
It's so man. What was I gonna go with this? I don't know, I prefer the Wii U version, weirdly enough still. I mean, I think I love the co-op of the Switch version. And there was more. What was the other thing they added to the Switch version?
They added like a pre and post like game stories, if I remember correctly. So I think one of them is like it's a prequel Olimar like story, and then there's like a sequel Olimar story, which I think everyone at the time presumed was a lead up to 4. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh, maybe this gives us a hint of where 4 is going to be, or, something like that. Or maybe it's like an actual proper conclusion to Olimar's story, which, as we learned, would not be the case. But it's, ultimately, honestly, I really like a lot of the bonus content. My wife and I played it together. We played through the full game together. That's how she like really experienced Pikmin like for the first time. Like, she'd played a little bit of it at my house, but ultimately not frequently enough, and not like in depth enough to actually beat Pikmin 3, which is funny because it's obviously one of the shorter entries, and is excellent enough that even someone who it was their first Pikmin game like could have a reasonable chance of beating it. Like, I felt the difficulty in terms of day management was actually quite balanced, but the difficulty of like trying to minimize the number of days that you like spent was totally there if you wanted it.
Yeah, it had a great way of creating a difficulty, like a way to, I don't know, like for those who want to play, make the game harder for themselves, they just can, like just by default. It's a high score game at that point. Versus, new people can still get in, and honestly, if you collect all the fruit, you can survive a lot of days. Like, I always had way more juice than I needed to complete the game, except for like the one or two, like when Louis comes in. But
yeah,
but and then, even then, when he put that put a little bit of strain on me, and then I'm like straight back to the way things were. So it's I don't know, it's so strange because I think a Pikmin 3 is definitely like the black sheep of them in a weird way, and I don't mean that as a bad thing. It's just, it is the most unique. Maybe it's like almost like the Majora's Mask of Pikmin.
I can see it.
Even though it's not that drastically different, it's still Pikmin, but it is like, it was the first game where it was like, hey, we're going to actually omit Pikmin, and having the 3 captains, which I found it was funny because it seemed like Nintendo was going on this whole like Pikmin 1, you're Olimar, Pikmin 2, you have Olimar and Louis, it's Pikmin 2. And in Pikmin 3, you had the 3 captains. So it was like, I was like, oh, in Pikmin 4, we can have 4 captains or 4 characters? No, we have your character in Ochi. But
and Ochi's a good enough boy to count for 3 captains.
Basically, yeah. And I'm happy with that. I don't need them to go 4 or 5 and 6 captains.
No, I did sort of miss some of the Dandori aspect of having multiple captains, which I know you can use, Ochi as a captain, but he does have more function than a captain does, and so in that way, I do consider it to be different. And you do lose the platforming aspect that 3 introduced, of being able to have captains throw each other and reach areas, and unlocking areas in a like Pikmin 4 is more completionist in that way, whereas like Pikmin 3 almost has hints of Metroidvania design in that way, where it's like you sort of have to have the captains and the right types to unlock this path sort of thing. And so I think that was missing from 4. It's something I love from 3, and I think it was missing in 4. I would love it if 5 sort of brought that back together, but at the same time, I love where Pikmin 4 is going. So if we never see that again, I'd be sad, but I'd be okay with it.
Yeah, I think kind of in a way we've talked about this too, where Pikmin 1 was the original and it has a time limit, and then you have Pikmin 2, which was like this new take on it, right? It's still Pikmin, but you have no time limit. It's all about collecting, and it had like all this extra content. Pikmin 3 felt kind of like a different version of Pikmin 1. There is technically a time limit. It's not as strict or hard, but it's there. It's also a very short game, like Pikmin 1. And then Pikmin 4 comes out, and it feels like Pikmin 2, but with with all the extra content and no time limit, and the underground is like it's curious to see if Pikmin 5 will be again another pivot, or if this will finally be where we get something that just feels incredibly different.
I'm kind of hoping for something new. What I hope is, and is probably a little bit too ambitious of a hope, is I would love to see them come along and sort of, in the same way that they reimagined Zelda for Breath of the Wild, like reimagine Pikmin. I'm not saying I want like an open world Pikmin, though that has crossed my mind and would be kind of interesting. But I would love to see them change the formula in a way that that stays true to what Pikmin is, but like reimagines it and expands it to, one, appeal to a broader audience while still keeping the same core identity, but 2, like give us more like interesting gameplay, like even more interesting gameplay, like more, I don't know, creativity, like stuff that really only like Nintendo can do, right? Like in the way that Breath of the Wild evolved Zelda, I would love to see Pikmin 5 evolve Pikmin. And again, maybe that's asking a lot. Maybe Pikmin is best when it's, in some ways sort of, I don't want to say simple, but like kind of like we've discussed before, how like restrictions sometimes are what make puzzles interesting. Maybe like Pikmin does well with certain constraints, and maybe that's the better game. I don't know. All I know is that I would not be opposed to seeing them experiment with Pikmin and try something a little bit different.
Yeah, I do think it needs some kind of experimentation, and I think that there's still an insane amount of potential with things they can do. I've had ideas as far as like bringing back more procedural generated stuff, where, I mean, it's hard because you don't want the whole game to be procedurally generated, because then there's certain character that comes from each level, certain, love and craft that went into it. But there's a part of me that thinks it would be really cool to see like have maybe it be a mode that you can play where it's just, you can just keep playing new levels. It could just be a level builder where it's kind of like a la Mario Maker, but for Pikmin, especially if the Switch 2 is going to have mouse controls. I could see a lot of user-generated content being the focal point of a lot of the Switch 2 because of those mouse controls, custom Mario Kart tracks, custom Pikmin levels, custom whatever. But that's one thing. Also, just obviously having maybe a little bit more like Pikmin 4. What was fun, even though you didn't really do it, that it kind of happened naturally. But this whole building your own camp with all these different characters was kind of fun, and they gave you different missions, and they were just interesting, fun caricatures. Be fun to have something where it's almost like a colonization type thing, where you're going in and you're actually building up a world, and then like introduce new things like mechanical Pikmin, right? It's like kind of like some crazy scientist guy decided I wanted to create a Pikmin that, that can do this thing, but it's like it has its pros in that it's maybe arguably a little bit better than a Pikmin, but its downside is that it breaks and it only lasts so many days. So you come up with like these different like limiting factors to it, but you have to use resources to build them. You have certain Pikmin that you leave behind to do work on your base while you're also out and about doing missions. So so you can give each type of Pikmin new attributes based on their type. So like there's advantages to keeping them back, there's advantages to taking them with you, and so you want to balance that. So it creates even more strategy, more Dandori, because you have to be selective about how you use them in a completely different way. And so I don't know. I mean, that's just me brainstorming, but I just basically, if I can come up with those silly ideas, and Nintendo, they'll come up with something no one thought of. So they're gonna, Miyamoto's got some more gas in the tank. I think he's got more ideas he'd love to share with the world. So that's another interesting point, actually. I just wanted to bring up, and then I want to hand it off to you. Miyamoto is the one who created Pikmin. And, he's a creator of Mario, creator of Pikmin, and I think he's kind of the reason Pikmin is still alive to this day, because it's never sold very well until recently. What do you think is going to happen with Pikmin when he eventually retires?
It's something that I consider, like, actually a lot more often than I really want to. Because obviously, like, Pikmin hasn't always done well. Nintendo consoles aren't necessarily guaranteed to sell well from here on out. Just because the Switch did well doesn't mean the Switch 2 is guaranteed to do well. Doesn't mean that, the one after that's guaranteed to do well. Like, eventually they're probably going to have another dud, right? I think that's more likely than every console from here on out selling, buku bucks or whatever. And so I think that there's half a chance that you get one with a bad install base, and I think there's half a chance a Pikmin game comes out on it. If Pikmin's built up as an IP by then then maybe it'll be like somewhat resistant to it. But I could, unfortunately see I could envision a future in which Pikmin goes back into dormancy, unfortunately. Which would be sad. I feel like 4, in some ways is a big triumph for the community because, finally we got one that hit some pretty decent numbers. But there's always that risk. Yeah. That it goes back into something that we don't see for quite some time. And I don't know, will I have moved on myself by then? Probably, who knows, but as for kids today who love Pikmin, they're gonna want to hopefully be playing Pikmin games for the next 10-20 years or so at least.
Yeah. I mean, do you see it being almost like Earthbound where, the original creator just stopped making them and he's just content? And so with Miyamoto retiring, that's Pikmin because it's his?
It's totally possible. I mean, if you look at a lot of Nintendo's marketing, Pikmin is now pretty regularly included. Now, whether or not that's Nintendo trying to wish something into reality by including it next to Mario and Zelda, or Link, really, but Zelda is a franchise and Splatoon and Animal Crossing, they're big sellers, and then it's oh yeah, and here's Pikmin too, yeah. My understanding, my understanding is it does really well in Japan, and that merch sales are good as well. That's my understanding with it. And so whether or not they're trying to wish something into existence, or whether or not they actually have the data to back it up and say no, actually this is becoming a much bigger thing, and we, based on our history, actually expect it to continue to grow. If that's the case, that's very encouraging. And I think that's in a very unique position compared to Earthbound, where Earthbound, in some ways, because it was created by someone other than Miyamoto, it wasn't pushed. To my knowledge, it was never considered one of the main marketed franchises. Ness showed up in Smash Brothers, sure, and he was there from the first one. And even Pikmin didn't appear in Melee. Pikmin didn't appear in Smash really until Brawl. And so unless there's an assist trophy, or not an assist trophy, a trophy or some reference to it that I'm not aware, that I can't remember right now in Melee. But for that reason, I think that there's half a chance that it continues, but then I can also unfortunately see it going into dormancy. But who knows? Maybe because of the popularity in Japan, maybe it's immortal now. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just wondering too. Obviously, at some point, these franchises have to be passed on, from their original creator. And Mario's kind of already started that transition with Odyssey was actually created by a lot of new people within Nintendo. I believe, Miyamoto's still overseeing all that stuff, but my understanding is internally he is doing a lot of training and building a lot of, actually, strangely, that's why the Nintendo Museum was created, is like an onboarding program for employees to understand the culture of Nintendo and the history of Nintendo before working there. So I think that they're trying their best to maintain, because they know what works. They know they need to keep their IPs alive, and they need to keep them, they have certain rules for them. And, Pikmin is also one of those core franchises to them. Even if it hasn't sold well, it's important to Miyamoto, and Miyamoto is very important to Nintendo. Nintendo wouldn't be what it is without Miyamoto. So it'd be interesting to see someone other than Miyamoto overseeing a Pikmin game. Like, what kind of thing would they do? Kind of like what we're seeing, again, like you said, with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom being kind of very different takes on the Zelda franchise while still being managed by in Asia. Oh my gosh, I can't say it. Aonuma. Thank you. It's like, I know the name, bad pronouncing. And, but eventually it's still, he's overseeing it. There's a lot of new people bringing up ideas, and that's why we're seeing this change and everything. So I think we're going to see a big shift this generation. I think the Switch 2 is where we see a lot of big names start retiring, or at the very least at the end of the Switch 2 we'll see that. Maybe the Switch 2 will be the swan song of a lot of these legendary developers, but I think Miyamoto is getting up to like 70, I think.
I mean, I think it's pretty clear that we need AI to advance to the point where we can create like an AI Miyamoto to keep him alive forever.
Well, it needs to be like one of those where you transfer his consciousness into it, right? It can't just be like an AI that mimics it. It's like literally him. So we need to be literally him.
Clearly, for the betterment of mankind, we need to prioritize this technology now.
Well, if anyone were to do that, it'd be the Japanese. So
this is true.
And Nintendo, right? But yeah, I don't know. It's, who's to say what's going to happen? I believe Nintendo is definitely shifting gears a little bit more. They've had immense success these past 8 years, and they definitely are trying to. You look at the Switch 2. Clearly, they've learned some lessons. The fact that they still made a new Pikmin game is phenomenal. The Zelda games are bigger than they've ever been before. The Switch, literally, people really don't realize that the Switch is when Zelda franchise actually got big. People are like, oh, it was always big, and everyone loves Ocarina of Time. I'm like, not like this.
Yeah, no, this was like Breath of the Wild was something else, which I think is why you saw them dedicate 6 years to a sequel to that game specifically.
Yeah. And so with Pikmin, they have a little bit more freedom because there's not the same, dedicated fan base. I mean, there's a dedicated fan base, but not to the same like widespread where they're worried about offending people. So I want to kind of revert back though, talk a little bit more about the games themselves, because we were talking about Pikmin 1, 2, 3, and now 4, right? But those are the mainline games. There are other Pikmin games, as you mentioned at the beginning. Now, one in particular, most people would agree that the 4 mainline Pikmin games are all good. Like, in my opinion, people can have their favorites, but I don't know too many people that are like, I just don't like that one. Like, they'll play all of them. But there's that one game called Hey Pikmin that came out for the Nintendo 3DS. I never played it. It came out at a weird time in my life, and it was also just a very unusual game. You did play some of it.
Some of it, yeah.
I want to get your thoughts on that. Like, it obviously doesn't play the same. It's a side scroller.
No. Yeah, no, it's level based, right? And there's really not like much of a Pikmin management aspect to it. Like, you're sort of like given Pikmin in the beginning and you find Pikmin within the level, but you don't get to choose like how many you go in with. And while there is the like Pikmin park where like the Pikmin that you like have alive at the end of a level like go and like work on what this plot of land essentially that you have is kind of bizarre. I never like completed the game, so maybe there is like a deeper function to it that I don't fully understand yet, but from what I played, there's certain things I like about it and certain things I don't like about it. So I like the idea of a side scroller Pikmin game because I think that Pikmin is an IP that can succeed if if you have the genre and sort of the scenario make sense. So, and that is not the case with Hey Pikmin. I don't think that it works particularly well. Like in that one, it's like you find treasure, the Pikmin bring it to you, and then Olimar pulls out a cosmic hula hoop, and the treasure just gets sucked in there and transferred to your ship. And it's actually where Sparklium comes from. So Sparklium, which they mentioned in Pikmin 4, is the fuel to get Olimar's ship working again in Hey Pikmin, if I remember correctly. And you get it from treasure. So that actually, that concept actually originated in Hey Pikmin. And which I didn't know. And so I like, in some ways, the way that the Pikmin control in there. Because I feel like you could make a decent puzzle side scroller. And my favorite genre is Metroidvania. I would love to see an attempt at a Metroidvania Pikmin game. If you made it like one interconnected world and were able to assemble bridges the way that sort of they do in Pikmin or Hey Pikmin, if you maybe not have the jetpack, but sort of refine the way that platforming would work, the way that, idle Pikmin work, etc. Like I'm essentially saying like, yeah, I supposedly like things in Pikmin, but I hate Pikmin, but I change everything about it. Which I guess in some ways is kind of true, but I think that some of them are like smaller tweaks and some of them are much larger tweaks, right? And so I do like the treasure collection aspect, and I like the like the way that you build stuff and unlock area, like different rooms and stuff. And you essentially have to bring enough Pikmin to access that next part of the level, or you don't get that optional part of the level. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so there are certain things I like about it. I just don't think they were executed as well as they could be. And I feel like if the whole game design was based around more of the way that Pikmin 3 works, where in Pikmin 3, you have a map which you can essentially consider to be your overworld, right? You like land at, I don't know, I can't remember off the top of my head like any of the Pikmin 3 level, the names in any of the Pikmin 3 levels, which shows how much of a Pikmin fan I apparently am. But there were certain parts of the levels that are blocked off by story, some of them which are blocked off by Pikmin type. I think it could be very interesting to have a Pikmin game where you unlock Pikmin types along the way and get to access these areas, but in a 2D context. That's essentially what I'm pitching. So I think that would have been a better game. That being said, I feel like some of the boss fights, at least on my first attempt, were, relatively challenging. I didn't go back and fight them again. Maybe they have like easy exploits. I didn't use a guide. I just sort of like played it. So maybe like they're easily exploited and that's the worst part of the game or something. But at least on a first playthrough, like sometimes they got some of my Pikmin, and for me, like losing one Pikmin is considered failure. So like in that way, I considered it like, at least somewhat challenging. I don't know. I think overall, definitely a misstep, definitely not what we wanted from our long-awaited Pikmin 4, which granted at the time it had only been a few years. But I think the fact that took place in the middle of the second Great Pikmin Depression, where we didn't get, a mainline game for a decade. And that's like all we had, with the exception of Bloom. Bloom came later, still during that time. But I think, that was the wrong game to end on. And I think that has contributed to its infamy. I don't think it's a great Pikmin game. I think it's a passable game in and of itself. I didn't hate playing it, but I clearly didn't like it enough to finish it. So, I don't know. Does that give you sort of a rundown of like what to expect from Hey Pikmin if you were to ever like get your hands on a copy of it? Like, what you'd walk in and expect?
Just have to almost like undo Pikmin from it. It's not really Like it didn't take the core elements that we like about Pikmin and put them into a side scroller. It just was like its own game that happened to have Pikmin characters.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there were like certain elements of it, like, oh yeah, you got the Pikmin to an area that you yourself can't access, so they transport stuff for you. It's like, okay, that is clearly Pikmin. But there was no time management. It was just try to get your Pikmin to the end of the level without dying. Also try to find these 3 treasures along the way, and maybe there's like a secret exit.
Yeah.
So in some ways it's like they almost were like, let's do a Mario level design, but with like Pikmin elements. So you know how you collect the 3 coins in side scroller Mario or whatever, and then maybe there's like a secret exit. It was essentially that. But Pikmin, and with way clunkier controls.
It was a weird time for Nintendo because it was just like they had 3 franchises they did this to, where they kind of came out with games when there was a big lull that nobody was happy with. Actually, there was a lot more than that, but I was just thinking on the 3DS because you had Pay Pikmin, Chippy Robo Ziplash, you had Metroid Prime Federation Force, and then on the Wii U they actually came out with the Animal Crossing board game.
Yeah, which is like totally bizarre.
So they had like this weird time right around that same time where like they just came out with like 3 games that just all were like right when we're waiting for a mainline version of the game. And that was the problem. It's like it's okay to come out with the spin-offs when they're like kind of close to a mainline game. You know, it's like kind of like as a tide you over kind of thing. But when you've been waiting that long and that's the announcement you get, and then the game's not even that good. Like if it was like a new concept, but it ended up being like kind of like how Pokemon Arceus, Legends Arceus, was like this new take on Pokemon, and it was actually good. It was.
I consider it to be far superior to both Sword and Shield and Scarlet Violet.
100%. Like I feel like that's the only type of Pokemon game I'll play now because it was like the first time I actually felt like I was having fun. I think it was it Donkey? I think it was saying this is like that's like basically the second Pokemon game. All of them have been
Pretty
the same
much, yeah.
Pokemon game up till Arceus. It's like Pokemon 2. So yeah,
I would argue Gold and Silver were enough of a departure. They were
true.
Enough of an improvement.
That's true.
But I get the joke.
It's a joke, right? Because I agree, Gold and Silver were phenomenal. But yeah, I think that Pikmin and like many of these franchises, it's fun to do the spin-offs, but I think Nintendo picked some weird times, weird ideas. It definitely didn't feel like it was very well fleshed out. Like just like all of them, they felt like they were kind of just stopgap games to kind of keep you occupied versus like I'd almost rather there be like a mainline Pikmin game and then like a $10 eShop like mini game type thing that's tied to it. Like I don't know if that makes sense. Like maybe that's wrong of me. Like I shouldn't be against like full-fledged new concepts. But they've got to be well executed. They can't just be like thrown out there. So I don't know. I'll probably have to give it a try sometime though.
And I've never played Federation Force. I've actually played the other 2 that you listed. I've never played Federation Force. I kind of want to. 1, because I'm a glutton for punishment. But 2, like my understanding is it's like there's some obviously poor choices that were made, in that game. But like my understanding is the gameplay is actually quite passable if you're doing it with a friend. Like there's some levels that are just apparently like truly awful, but there's some like actually like nice parts about it. Like some like that in some ways it's, maybe it's not a perfect game. Maybe it's not, up to the level of quality of the series, which I guess in some ways like really, like it says a lot about Pikmin and Metroid that those are like such good games that even like passable games are considered total failures, right? So the thing that I would like, sort of how I was like pitching a new Hey Pikmin, I think that there totally is a market for a co-op Galactic Federation, like essentially first-person shooter. The way I do it is almost essentially like give us the soft sequel to Star Wars Republic Commando that we like obviously deserved, but it's set in Metroid. That's more or less what I would want.
Yeah.
Because you've played that game, right?
Oh, Commandos, yeah. Star Wars Republic Commando. I have that game. Love it.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. That we deserved a sequel to that, and unfortunately, we'll probably never get it. But I would, absolutely love if they would revisit some of these, right? Because I don't think that a 2D side-scroller Pikmin is inherently bad. I don't think that a co-op like Metroid like shooter with the Galactic Marines is inherently bad. I actually think that both of those could be fun. You would just have to design them properly. And I think that they just sort of had the wrong idea in mind. And I think that is the second tragedy of that, right? There's the initial tragedy of it's just not a good game. Like, we're not having a lot of fun with it. And, maybe it even hurts the franchise. But then once the franchise recovers and does well, then like the possibility of the best version of that idea is like never going to be investigated. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so what the IP could become in like a slight genre tweak, unfortunately you would never get that.
So I was just looking up, sorry, this is like completely changing, but I was looking at release dates for the Pikmin games because I kind of want to see like, okay, we're calling these droughts, right? So Pikmin 1 to Pikmin 2 was like 3 years. Then Pikmin 2 to Pikmin 3 was 9 years. Mm-hmm. But technically, Nintendo might say, but we re-released Pikmin 1 and 2 on the Wii, so they kind of look at those as still releases, the same way like re-release Zelda games. So they would argue it's not as bad of a drought. And then between Pikmin 3 and Pikmin 4, Pikmin 3 came out in 2013. Hey Pikmin, which I didn't realize this, came out after the Switch released. It came out July 28th, 2017.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The Switch had already released. So it was obviously brand new, and Nintendo was still supporting. It was the same time they released the Hey Pikmin and Samus Returns while the Switch was out. And, it's just, so that was like what? So it's 4 years. 4 years between Pikmin 3 and Hey Pikmin, and then from Hey Pikmin, that's about 6 years, because it's 2023. So...
Well, but in the meantime, we got Pikmin 3 Deluxe as a re-release. If you're defining re-releases as...
Yeah.
Like...
And we got Pikmin Bloom.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, they kind of have been trickling Pikmin out, just not brand new games all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then, of course, like when the Wii U came out, we had the Pikmin, the Pikmin Adventure. So, they have been trickling out to us, but just, I mean, our definition of it is very different, I think, than what Nintendo looks like. They're just looking at the same way they released DK Country Returns HD, whatever, just now. That's their way of just being like trying to keep IP exposure up at all times, whether it's a new game or not. Because we have to remind ourselves, too, like, there are new generations coming up all the time that haven't played the new games. That's why Pikmin 1 and 2 being re-released on the Switch is such a big deal. Because people like me who never played them, or my kids who obviously are just now getting into games, can play those games. So I think it's hard for us because we always want the new thing, right? We always want them. We don't want to wait 10 years for Pikmin 5. But there is an element of like, when they do release it, though, it's always phenomenal. But it's interesting looking at Nintendo's release schedule and realizing, wait, they have been kind of trying to keep Pikmin around. It's clearly a strategy there. And I think it's working. It's been a very, very slow burn. But I think finally, and I think there's a lot more to it too. I think Pikmin 4 had a lot of quality of life improvements. Its general pacing and as well as its look and feel. I don't even know how to put my finger on it. It just felt like a great game to introduce people to Pikmin. Like my kids play Pikmin 4. I think they'd have a hard time playing Pikmin 1 or 2.
I guess we're going to have to find out, conduct an experiment.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, they still struggle with Pikmin 4, but, it's got the rewind function, which my kids didn't even know about. I had to tell them, like, hey, you can hit this button, right? It's like, oh. And, there's...
and then they're thinking about the Pikmin Arlington cemetery that they had to dig. And they're just like, this could have been avoided.
They spend so many days just replenishing their Pikmin inventory. And it's hard because in Pikmin 4, I mean, unless you go underground, the enemies... Because I think the enemies always respawn underground, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they don't create new Pikmin, though, if you go under there.
Yeah, so you'd have to wait for pellets.
Yeah, the only way to replenish Pikmin is pellets in Pikmin 4. And so they spend like all this time replenishing their Pikmin because they wipe out their whole team, not realizing they can just rewind the day. But point is like that's still a possibility in Pikmin 4. And Pikmin 1, it's just like, sorry. Pikmin 2, it's even more sorry. So yeah, it's a great franchise though. I think I don't know if we did a great job selling it to anyone who's listening. If the couple people that are listening, and if you hadn't played Pikmin, but it's a really fun franchise. It's super gets you thinking. I like thinking games that really make you kind of with the Dandori, and there's so many games now. They're just kind of autopilot games, or they're just very very fast paced. Everything's go go go. But it's fun to have games where it's a little bit more slice of life in a way, even though it's not like an Animal Crossing. But just walking around in Pikmin 4 and looking at the vistas in the world, and you recognize objects, especially in Hero's Hideaway, which is like such a phenomenal
it's
level.
amazing.
It's like it's like a taste of what we're going to get, I think, in the next Pikmin games, as far as like fidelity and just the way you just feel like you're part of a real world. And the music's phenomenal too.
Hero's Hideaway actually is, actually a pretty good example of some of the like level design philosophy of Pikmin 3 in terms of like locking certain parts of the level behind like essentially like puzzles, or like, how you can only access like one part of the kitchen counter after you can, come out of the exit of a certain cave, for example. So I think there probably actually are parts of the game that I hadn't really considered in that way. I maintain that they're still different, but Hero's Hideaway is actually probably one of the best levels in Pikmin 4. I also really like, just me personally, I really like Giant's Hearth.
It is right. It's a super good one too. Actually, it's one of my favorites as well. And also just the vibe, the theme, the sound of it, the little twangy guitar. It's it's super fun. I mean, just getting there is amazing, just because you're like, wait, there's more game. Like that level is special to me, just because you're like, and in my mind, I'm like, oh, this is the post game content right here. It's just one level, and then there's more. Just like,
there's more.
It just keeps getting better. So it's phenomenal how long that game goes on. But
it was definitely worth the money at the end. Like I remember at the end with Pikmin 3, I'm like, oh, that was a bit short. I'm like, it was still like a great enough experience to be worth the money. And then like I finished Pikmin 4. Obviously 10 years later I have a different valuation of money, and I'm just like, this was 100% worth it. Like I would buy this again. Like absolutely.
Well, because it's so fun that just if you're just playing through it for one playthrough, it's already enough content. But there's so much incentive to go back and replay it, to either, again, like Pikmin 2, to get that lower day score, like to beat the game in less days, be more efficient. Absolutely. How fast can you 100% everything? Or, of course, the Dandori battles, like getting all the platinum badges. It's like, and some of them are very hard.
And there's casually one that canonically should not be hard, but it's like ridiculous.
Yes. So there's so much incentive to go back, and it's just fun anyway, just to replay all the levels and try and approach it from a different way. And no, it's really fun. It'd be very interesting to see. We're already coming up on 2 years. I'm kind of secretly hoping that we get like some kind of Pikmin spin-off game coming out with Switch 2, but I have a feeling we'll have to wait at least another couple years before we see the next. I don't think we'll see Pikmin 5. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but I think we'll see a spin-off before we see a next mainline game.
I agree. Like there's supposedly a rumor that we're getting a Pikmin spin-off sometime this year. If that's true, that'd be awesome. If not, like I'm not going to hold my breath for it. But I do think, like if I were Nintendo and I was like, okay, we want to grow this IP. In order to do that, we should probably like make some sort of a spin-off. Now would be the time for that, in my opinion. Because I think the IP is in a good enough place to do that. And also, you have a new console coming out. And so even if it's just some like $20 eShop title, even if it's like, the Pikmin equivalent of Kirby's like whatever, the dessert rolling game that Kirby had, if it's essentially the Pikmin equivalent of that, where it's just some like random eShop title that's like replayable, and who knows, maybe it's like competitive or something, like I don't care, like just give me more Pikmin. As the only thing that I probably wouldn't buy would be like a learn to type with Pikmin game. I probably wouldn't get that.
No, you would.
But Okay, I might. I might like try to convince my wife, like, we got to teach the cats how to type. They keep climbing all over the keyboard, but they clearly don't know how to spell. So let's at least put them to work.
Right. We need like a Pikmin 99 or something.
I would love that. I like truly, actually, a Pikmin 99 would be really cool.
I don't know how they do it, but that'd be fun.
I don't know how they do it either, but that would be a really great one. Yeah, and circling back a little bit, I think this episode was more of like a Pikmin series retrospective than it was like why Pikmin is the best series. And so maybe we'll actually have to like sort of get a game plan and pitch why Pikmin is the best series in the future. But I do feel this was in some ways more of a retrospective. However, that being said, if you haven't played Pikmin, go play Pikmin.
Yeah. Now, so you've heard this podcast, go play Pikmin so that when we do our why Pikmin is the best, you can actually chime in because you'll already be converted by then. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You will be part of the Leafling cult.
Yes. You will never leave.
Yep. Never. You'll just say Dandori over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been fun. It's fun to reminisce. Pikmin is there's so much. We really just scratched the surface. There's memories of the game, things that details I would have loved to get into too, about like graphical differences and changes between games, sound design, controls. And we delved into some of that, but this was a fun way for us to just regurgitate a bunch of our love for Pikmin and our experience with the series. And we hope, if you've had any experience with Pikmin, that you leave a comment and let us know, like when you first started playing Pikmin and what your experience was with it. We'd love to hear from you. But yeah, this has been the Super Dandori Bros. Thank you for listening. I'm Leighton. He's Ryan. And we'll catch you next time. Bye.
See ya.